Hi everyone, Stephen Molnar here, Head of Education for Resimax Group. I just wanted to give everyone a really quick overview of what's happened in the Australian budget, the Australian federal budget that was just released the other day. So what I'd like to do is just cover off a couple of important things for you, particularly from the perspective of those people who are investors. So the May budget, as you may be aware, was delayed 5 months due to COVID-19, and the Treasurer said that it was mostly a health crisis that created an economic crisis. And unlike our early 1980s and 1990s recessions, this created both a supply and a demand side shock. And it was different to the Great Depression because the world is so interconnected and it spread much faster. But Australia started in a really strong position. We were originally going for a yearly surplus. We had very low government debt. We had a AAA credit rating from all three of the major credit bureaus, and we had very strong exports, particularly around our commodities like iron ore. We also prioritized our health outcome over our economic outcome. And what we did was things like international and domestic border closures, compulsory masks, contact tracing, use of apps, public and workspace gathering restrictions, lockdowns, etc. And what that meant was that Australia went into this COVID-19 with the first recession that we've had in nearly 30 years. Our economy, it shrunk by 7.3% in the first half of this year. Now, most other economies shrunk by double-digit figures. The only two countries that did better than us was South Korea and Finland. So Australia did third best in the entire world in terms of a GDP status. Our forecast for GDP growth for the next year is 4.75%. The world's probably going to go 5%, but that's only because Australia didn't drop as much as the rest of the world. And then once we get over the 4.75% hit, we'll probably settle back down to around a 2% growth. Now, what the government's doing is it's spending a record amount of money on our stimulus. We're going to go into a deficit this year of about $213 billion, and that's 11% of our GDP, and that's a total debt of about $703 billion. But it's going to reduce over the next few years in terms of how much stimulus they're going to keep pouring in, and our debt will peak at about 966 billion Australian dollars, which is about 44% of GDP. Now, that sounds like a big number, but the UK, their percentage of debt to their GDP is more than double Australia's. America is more than triple, and Japan is like 5 times the amount of debt they have for the amount of output they have each year. So Australia's doing really well without spending outside of what it can afford to spend. And also, because Australia has the AAA credit rating, we can borrow money at record low rates throughout the world at 0.9%. So in fact, even with this huge debt, we're paying less per annum than what we were a couple of years ago on a much, much smaller debt. So it's absolutely affordable and we're doing really well. Now, our Treasurer has flagged this budget as what's called a recovery budget in his terms. And we're moving from a crisis, which was to cushion the blow, to a rebuilding phase. In fact, the amount they're spending is a record amount. No government in Australia has ever spent this amount of money. And even when the GFC happened in around 2009 to us, we spent money, but we're spending 4 times more money right now. And we're going to spend that in areas like income tax cuts, cash splashes, incentives for businesses to invest and hire more people, wage subsidies, education and training. And I'm going to talk a little bit about first homeowners and infrastructure spending because it's very relevant to everyone who's listening in today. So just in terms of the income tax cuts, they've brought forward already approved income tax cuts. They brought them forward 2 years. So 11 million more people that are wage earners will actually have more money in their pockets. It's been backdated to the 1st of July this year, which is when our financial year starts, but they really can't get it in their pockets until probably next month, early next month. And at the end of the tax year, they'll all get a refund for the first half of the year. They're also doing cash splashes to pensioners, carers, and people like this, and it's about $500 that's going to be split up into 2 payments, $250 now and $250 in March next year. Why this is really important is because people in lower tax brackets tend to spend more than people in upper tax brackets who tend to save more. And household consumption in Australia represent half of our entire economy. You see, the more spending simply means more jobs. Now, the government's doing a whole lot of incentives for businesses to invest in themselves and to hire more people. Our unemployment rate is at 6.8% at the moment, which is great. It's before, when the pandemic started, people expected it to be around 20%, but because of the crisis funding the government's already poured in, the unemployment rate rose to about 7.5%, and they expected it to go up in the last quarter to 7.7, but it actually fell to 6.8%. Now, because of all the stimulus and because our economy is structurally sound and getting back to normal very quickly, unemployment is expected to peak at the end of this year at 8%, and then continue to keep falling back and back and back, be around 6% by 2023. And the Treasurer has said, and he stated this publicly, that he will keep spending money or fiscal stimulus till it's well under 6%. So around the 5.5% is what he's aiming for, and that's going to be around 2024. Australia, in the first hit, we lost 1.3 million jobs, but well over half of those are actually already back. And the budget that they put together is expected to create 950,000 jobs, or just under 1 million jobs over the next 4 years, plus another 550,000 jobs that they're going to be supporting through various wage subsidies. Now, some of the incentives for businesses to invest in themselves and more plant and equipment and to hire more people and lower the unemployment rate include, and I should point out, this is highly targeted. So it's for 99% of the businesses, not the top 1% of businesses who the government thinks have enough money, and they're the miners and the banks. This is for all the other businesses down, even to the really small businesses. The government's offering what's called an instant asset write-off. So rather than depreciating something over many years, what they can do is write it off immediately, and that's worth about $26 billion. They're also doing what's called a loss carryback, which is popular in other countries, where the business, so a successful business, gets refunded all of their tax from the previous year to help them cash flow themselves this year. They've also introduced US-style insolvency protection, so a business that's not doing great now can actually restructure, has time to do that, and can trade its way out. One of the other things they announced, which is really important for people in Victoria, is that there's going to be a big focus on manufacturing, because the government wants Australia in several key industries to be much more self-sufficient in case a shock like this happens and supply lines are interrupted. And Victoria is the heart of manufacturing in Australia, and the government wants to get this up and running very quickly, so it only makes sense that they're going to invest in manufacturing in places where it already is and can expand quickly and easily. So watch this space. I think Victoria will be a big winner out of that. Now, also in terms of the wage subsidies and the education and training, part of this will be the government is going to be spending $1.2 billion supporting 100,000 new apprentices and paying those businesses up to half of that apprentice's wage. So that's enormous for young people. They're also going to say, apart from apprentices, just generally young people, the government will create what's called a job maker program. So businesses will get credits to hire people that are young. And this is worth $4 billion, and this will create another 450,000 jobs. The government is pouring $1 billion into Job Trainer, which will fund free or low-cost courses. These are mostly trades courses or skilled courses that people need immediately for a job. And then also $300 million for about 12,000 extra tertiary or university level education places. So what this means is a lot of young people will become more credit worthy sooner. so they can borrow money sooner, they can borrow more money sooner. And what that'll do is, because these people are generally first home buyers, it's going to massively stimulate the first home buyer type properties at the lower end of the market in the outer areas. Now, also specifically around first homeowners and infrastructure spending, the government is actually also doing another 10,000 places in what's called its first home buyers deposit program, where the person only needs to come up with 5%. The banks will lend the other 80% as per usual, but the government will cover the extra 15% in terms of underwriting it. So the bank will still lend 95%, but the bank's only on the hook for 80% of the risk. The government will take on some of that other risk. And what that's going to do is allow younger people to get into the market much faster, much easier in those outer areas, in those starter homes. Now, the government's also committing $14 billion to new and accelerated shovel-ready infrastructure projects, because these create an enormous amount of jobs. But what's also important is not only do they create jobs, but they steal jobs. Many people who currently work in construction are used to that work environment, outdoors, with heavy materials, heavy machinery. It's going to steal or transfer a lot of jobs from that industry. And those people will be trapped or happily trapped in infrastructure construction for, many, many years, even decades. It also means there's going to be a lot of competition for materials and equipment like concrete and pipes and iron and steel and all of these sorts of things. So any company that does infrastructure building will actually have a lot more work than they can handle. So their prices will go up, and that'll be passed on to governments and corporations and land developers as well. So that'll all be passed on to the end user. So that's a really important point to understand, that it's going to push up the prices and the cost of infrastructure for everyone. Also, the government has said that the $25,000 home builder scheme is still there. It'll be available to the end of the year, and it can also be stacked with first home buyers and other incentives like this low deposit program. Again, this will massively stimulate the outer area growth of these starter homes for the first home buyers. Now, I just want to mention a couple of other things which are important to note. Our population in Australia, we've had great population growth. In fact, since 1946, our population has been expanding positively. Because of our international borders being shut, that means no foreign people can come into the country. And we have a slightly lower fertility rate than other countries. So what that means, it's going to take a couple of years, 3 or 4 years, for international demand and migration to come back to the levels we've had in the past. Now, the government knows how valuable this is, so they're probably going to do some things to assist that, because it's so important to particularly the big cities' economies like Sydney's and Melbourne's. What's also happening is domestic migration. Many people have realized they don't need to work in the cities. They don't want to work so close to other people and live so close to other people, and they realize they can telework, and many will move out of the cities to greater lifestyle areas, particularly in the fringes, to have a sea change, a tree change, or even a tea change. The Reserve Bank of Australia has also said, in terms of monetary policy, which is the interest rates, they were going to wait and see what the government was going to do with their fiscal policy. They've committed to keeping interest rates low for the foreseeable future. They may even drop it a further 0.15% to a 0.1% cash rate. We already have the lowest rate we've ever had in our entire history, but if they drop it to 0.1%, all the big banks will actually drop their interest rates as well. And that'll just mean it's going to be cheaper for people to buy properties, and they're going to be more willing to invest because they can afford them better. And in fact, the Reserve Bank governor and most of the economists have said we'll be out of our recession by about this time next year. And in fact, Western Australia is already ahead of the curve. They've already released their budget and they're in a surplus. And the other states, again, we're structurally in the same position. We're just got to catch up. Particularly Melbourne's going to be, or Victoria will be just a couple of months behind the rest of the country. Another important thing that the government has flagged, that they think lending criteria is too onerous, too difficult. You know, the banks are looking for how many times you use Uber and all of these sorts of things. It's just making it too difficult for people to get lending. What the government has said is that early next year, they are going to change the rules around lending to make it easier and simpler for people to get loans. So in combination with getting loans simpler, interest rates being at record lows or even lower than what they currently are, with all of these incentives, the types of properties that we invest in ourselves and we teach our clients about, they are set to boom. So guys, hopefully you've enjoyed that really quick update. I've tried to focus on what I think are the important things in the budget. So guys, I look forward to connecting with you soon in one of our other articles or our webinars soon. All the best. Bye-bye.